No, there we go. Welcome to meeting number 5 of the House of Commons Standing on Heritage. Today's meeting is taking place to the standing orders. Members are attending in person here in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. All witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of this meeting. Please wait until I recognize you by name before you speak. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting for a briefing on the effects of technological advances in AI on the creative industries. And it is now my pleasure to welcome our witnesses. From the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, Marie-Julie Desrochers, Executive Director. La Coalition pour la Diversité des Expressions Culturelles. With Kopi Beck, Arzeki Rab, Director Général Adjoint, Assistant General Manager, Maurice Beaulieu, Advisor, Legal and Public Affairs. From the International Observatory on the Societal Impacts of AI and Digital Technologies, we have Dave Anktil, affiliated researcher. He is by video conference. And we have from the Hub, Rudyard Griffiths, publisher. All right, so we will start with Madame Desrochers for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my name is Marie-Julie Desrochers, and I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. I will now switch to French, but I wanted to state clearly that our organization is a Canadian one, so we have members in Quebec, English Canada, and also in the minority linguistic communities. Alors,
representing more than 350,000 creators, artists, and more than 3,000 cultural businesses, the coalition is concerned with the economic health of the cultural sector as much as with the vitality of creation. Particularly, we are interested in how culture is handled in trade agreements and the impact of the digital environment on the diversity of cultural expression so that public policy can actively protect our ecosystem as a whole. 20 years ago, Canada played a key role in adopting the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Diversity of Cultural Expression. Is the interpretation working?
Tout est bien, allez-y.
Everything is fine. Keep going. I had the impression there was a problem.
Est-ce que vous entendez bien la...
Can you hear the interpretation well?
Il y a du traduction en
There is a translation
français.
from English to French. Is there a problem here in the room?
Madame.
So please continue, ma'am. We're ready. Thank you. So 20 years ago, Canada played a key role in the adoption of the UNESCO Convention on Protecting and Promoting Diversity of Cultural Expression, the first country to have ratified it. Canada has since then continued to act as a leader in this field. Today, a technology transformation is necessary. Artificial and generative AI, as in many other sectors, its development is causing an upheaval in the cultural ecosystem. Many jobs are made fragile and artistic practices are made fragile, including the value chain, and its impact is being felt at all levels. Generative AI and online platforms have redefined how works circulate and causing unprecedented challenges for cultural industries. We now have machine-generated content without any clear definition of its nature. Art cannot be reduced to a simple series of algorithmic operations. It's indissociable from the human experience, from emotions, from the collective memory, and from identity.
de la création.
AI may be a tool in the service of creation, but it must not replace it.
Ne sont pas seulement
These issues are observable not only in Canada, of course, but beyond our boundaries. Recently, the international community made many commitments for cultural technology, and I will be happy to go into greater depth on this in the question period because I'm just coming back from the largest world conference on cultural policies and sustainable development organized by UNESCO, Mondiacult, which was held in Barcelona from September 29 to October 1. And during this, more than 100 cultural ministers attended, including the Honorable Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of
ont adopté
Heritage. So a final document was adopted, and I quote, facing these complex challenges of our era, it undertakes a digital approach focused on humans and based on human rights, respectful of cultural rights, that fosters equity and accessibility, and that values diversity of cultural expression, end quote.
des droits des artistes.
Protection of artists' rights, those of creators and rights holders in the digital environment, a fight against unethical use of AI, recognition of human creativity, support for discoverability of multilingual cultural content on digital platforms, involvement of the cultural sector in developing policies connected with AI, protection of copyright. These are key commitments that confirm that the regulation of AI is a global issue and that Canada must continue to play a key role in it.
D'auteur
In Canada, the Copyright Act already prohibits the use of works and sound recordings and protected performances without the permission of the rights holders, and we should be proud of it. Among the 50 organizations represented by the coalition, a broad consensus is emerging due to AI progress that is generative and its impact on creative industries. There are three pillars that are essential: authorization, compensation, and transparency,
essentiel de respect trois conditions
ART. So
va être
without this, our cultural sector will be weakened to the benefit of multinationals and to the detriment of Canadians.
impliqué
FedEx has actively gotten involved in consultations on copyright law in the context of generative AI and in C27, which has died on the order paper concerning
la coalition a formé
this sector. Our coalition has
lors de la période de
formulated specific demands that I'll be happy to elaborate on during the question period. Searching of text and data, no copyright for purely AI-generated content. 3, transparency for training data and resulting data for synthetic content. We've also taken note of the announcement of the minister concerning the creation of a panel of experts to develop new Canadian strategies on AI. We regret that no voices from the cultural industries is represented there, whereas the impacts of AI on creation are huge and immediate. Ma'am, if you could conclude, please. To conclude, Canada has made a commitment to innovation, but innovation must not be done to the detriment of culture. Canada must commit, as Mr. Guilbeault said at Mondiacult, promote a responsible and human approach to artificial intelligence and digital transformation, where culture is a powerful engine of innovation, inclusion, and economic growth. Thank you. Next, we have the witnesses from Quebec. I'm not sure if you're sharing the time, but between you, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Chair.
Je me présente, Ariske.
Let me introduce myself, Araski Rab from Quebec. I have Maryse Beaulieu with me, our Legal Affairs and Public Affairs Advisor, and I'm the Assistant General Manager. Thank you to the committee who invites us to testify regarding the impact of technological progress in artificial intelligence on creative industries. I would like to briefly present our organization. We are a collective reproduction rights organization. We're a nonprofit specialized in copyright management, founded in 1997 by Unique and Lanel. We represent today more than 30,000 authors and more than 1,400 publishers. We facilitate legal access to a broad repertoire of works protected by copyright through a licensing and authorization system. We've distributed more than $13 million over the past fiscal year as royalties for rights holders, and also more than $300 million since our creation. ABIBEC has had the opportunity to express itself on artificial intelligence, in particular during the last consultation on a generative AI that ended on January 15th, 2024. Furthermore, we, together with the books industry, we presented a brief on the amendments that we would like to see in Part 3 of Bill C-27. We have done the same thing with the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expression, and we also filed a joint brief with Access Copyright late August last in the pre-budget consultations where we dealt with AI. Not a week goes by without new developments taking place in artificial intelligence and generative AI. So we can already assert that rights holders are very concerned. We would even like to say that this is an existential risk for them. Protected works under the Copyright Act come from a human being. This is how the act was designed. It's important to set the groundwork and to remind them of that. Remind people of that. I would now like to turn over the floor to Maryse Beaulieu for the remainder.
C'est un partage équitable.
It's a fair sharing. So, good afternoon to everyone. Continuing along with what Arezki has said, furthermore, it is of key importance that copyright law be respected. It is the key legislation for creators, and we submit that the arrival of generative AI does not remove copyright law. On the contrary, it remains relevant, and it is the basis that we need to rely on. It is an act that provides exclusive rights to the rights holders and authorization when one wishes to use a protected work, and is the general rule. However, the use of broad language models has been done without obtaining this authorization, which goes against the underpinnings of this act. And it is important to add that we absolutely must not allow an exception for this. Creators who provide content based on research don't have a business model. There's no compensation provided, and this should not be tolerated at all. By the development of licenses, collective management organizations are well positioned to fulfill the needs of the market. Let us add that it is important for us to have normative texts. The artificial intelligence law and that on data died on the order of paper, and Canada needs to adopt regulations, particularly as regards transparency. This message, all of the cultural community repeats it, and it's important for it to be heard. There have been lawsuits in Canada, and we're waiting for results from the courts is not a way to legislate. We submit that it is important to have a government that is proactive in this field. Cultural sovereignty must be ensured because our identity depends on it. Hence, imperiling what defines us can only be the subject of negotiation, whatever form it may have. The sudden arrival in November 2022 of ChatGPT, we barely had time to deal with a whole new vocabulary, which we should say came from a different industry. This is increasing significantly regarding the coefficient of difficulty. We are still developing adequate literacy for that. We are not against AI. Don't misunderstand it. Creators are accustomed to using new tools. The debate is not presented in those terms. Rights holders went from an economic model from which they do not derive fruit. The industries of creative production are standard bearers of our identity and our culture. Culture is part of our collective and economic wealth in Canada. The impacts of artificial intelligence are real, And it's up to our elected officials. Ma'am, thank you. If you could conclude, please. We're already there. So it's up to our elected officials to face the challenge of generative AI for creators and the creative industries. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And next,
Awesome.
by a video conference, we have Dave Anctil from the International Observatory on the Societal Impacts of AI and the digital technologies. Thank you. So I'm going to try to be brief and respect 5 minutes and in complement with what's already been said. I'm not discussing culture, but artificial intelligence, and I would help the organizations that defend culture, including in Canada, because I'm well positioned to know to what extent these industries are threatened, and in particular, over and above the industries, the artists and creators themselves, which is the main topic of our discussion today. Non-artists or individuals such as studios can simulate works and market those works through artificial intelligence technologies, particularly generative and particularly agentic technology. Today, for example, a subject that's been talked about a lot, the false group Velvet Sundown, which had millions of hits on Spotify, is not a music group or a band. It's not an AI group that produced the music. Is simply one individual who simulated the existence of such a group and simulated the members of a fictional group and who generated music that is, of course, based on data derived from the web scraping, which, as is called, for those models. So there are synthetic studios that create fake actors, for example, Telly Norwood of Particle 6 Group Studio, that are essentially to create a lie in the sense that those actors, the synthetic actors, don't exist and they're only pretend unfounded pretensions per se. And of course, these actions will cause confusion among the public, and there are also unfair competition against artists and creators who have to spend a large part of their lives developing their talent, in studying, and in investing in our culture. In my opinion, the government has an absolutely existential and critical responsibility to protect its citizens, in particular those citizens who are artists, against theft and exploitation of their works, and against unfair competition that artificial intelligence is already doing and will continue to do even more so. For simple reasons, there's a difference between artists and professions such as mine, or doctors, lawyers, engineers, or even electricians. Those people are protected in their acts by the law. If a doctor uses ChatGPT to do an analysis of a patient's medical situation, the doctor is responsible for the diagnosis. But generative AI can create fake work or create a synthetic production. And there's absolutely no professional standard that guarantees the exclusivity of the artistic act as it exists for a large number of other professions. The result is that artists are left on their own, and it is the market essentially that dictates the preferences of, what's considered as an artist or not. And of course, this is what many economic stakeholders have understood. So it would be very easy to substitute living artists for synthetic artists. In other words, not artists at all, but actually synthetically generated products, which would contribute to greater precarity of the profession per se. So I would like to let the committee hear how important it is, first of all, to label synthetic productions in Canada. There is no legislative bill or supervision, but it would be a good idea to create a regulatory framework to make sure that synthetic productions are clearly identified as such. And in this context, of course, the public should at least be able to make some judgment on the audiovisual content or music that has been generated by AI systems, so that they can be aware that those productions are not works and that they do not at all follow the elementary requirements to consider it as an artistic or cultural production as such. And of course, we could argue that this regulation, which aims toward transparency and clarity of cultural productions, would also be a guarantee against disinformation coming from a wide range of stakeholders that can use these generative AI systems. I would like the committee to understand that I am not an artist and that nevertheless, tomorrow morning, I could launch myself into all sorts of fields, such as a graphic illustrator or audiovisual or music, without mastering any of the codes of those professions, quite simply by being able to use artificial generative systems. I could create a complete studio for the development of my own films or productions and invade the platforms of those contents. And all it would cost me would be to sign up for some non-Canadian companies that are all located in the United States with their servers and their algorithms that are used. So this is a real threat toward our sovereignty, not only cultural sovereignty in Canada, but even sovereignty, period. If elected officials cannot protect against the theft of data and against deceit of the public, who will be able to do so? Thank you, sir.
To Mr. Rudyard Griffiths of the Hub. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
I'll just be unmuted. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to address you and the committee, and thank you for the other witnesses testifying. I'm going to focus my remarks on the industry that the Hub is part of. That's the kind of news and information industry. I'm going to leave discussion of cultural industries, as we've just heard, to others who are more capable of providing assessment and reflection. What I want to talk a little bit with you about is the effects of AI on the publishing industry, the news industry. What we're seeing here at the Hub, which is a fast-growing independent news publisher. We've been in operation for about 5 years. We have approximately 2 million unique engagements with our content every 30 days. We operate a suite of public-facing news products, from podcasting to newsletters to, of course, a website and a YouTube channel. And our view is that as we approach AI as an industry, we need to understand both the benefits and the challenges. What we've heard to date from the witnesses, understandably, has been a note of concern about AI, about its effect on the creative industries. I would venture that in the news and information industries, there are some clear and positive effects. There's the ability to synthesize large amounts of information quickly and report out on this to news consumers. I draw the committee's attention to the remarkable work that's being done in the field of investigative journalism, using large language models and large data sets to further transparency and accountability on the part of organizations, including government. So I think we need to approach this conversation with some sophistication and understand that there are important applications of AI in a news context that can generate both productivity and profitability for news organizations, but also deliver to news readers and consumers news that is useful, well-researched, and genuinely uncovers new and important insights. In my remaining moments, I just want to shift, though, a bit to the challenges, because I hope we'll take these up in our discussion. Many news organizations now, for the better part of 2025, have been reporting significant drops in what's called their organic traffic. This is the referral traffic that traditionally has come from internet search engines. Some news outlets, not the Hub, thankfully, because we have a very diversified platform, but some news outlets are reporting declines of 50, 70, 80% of their organic traffic. And that organic traffic, in many cases, for larger news publishers, can make up over 50% of their total traffic. what in effect is happening is that people are using these powerful tools, the LLMs and search powered by AI. I'm sure the committee is all familiar with AI overviews, for example, inside Google. Consumers are using these to access the information they need. They are not going beyond the search page into the websites of not just news organizations, but anyone who's creating useful information on the internet. Some recent SEO studies have indicated that upwards of 60% of all Google searches are now zero click. So think about that. Google is responsible for 90% of all search volume in Canada, the United States, and much of the Western world. And 60% of all Google searches are zero click. Inside AI overviews and AI mode and other LLMs, the click-through rate can be as low as the single digits. This is obviously challenges the business models of many news and information providers on the web. And I hope we'll get into that in the discussion, how, from a public policy perspective, we address a fundamental change in the internet that is now ongoing as a result of AI, a fundamental change that will affect the websites that exist in the future, the information that will be available to citizens and consumers. I see that I'm at my 5 minutes, so I'm going to pause there, and I look forward to questions from the committee.
Well, you had 3 seconds to go, but I appreciate the succinct way that you have summed up, as any good broadcaster knows how to do. I'm going to turn the floor over to Mrs. Thomas for 6 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to each of our panelists for being here and for presenting today. My first question is going to be directed over to Mr. Griffiths from the Hub. There was an article that was published by the Hub entitled "AI Offers Canada an Open Opportunity." In that article, it states, and I'll quote, "Overregulation won't stop risky actors. It will just sideline responsible innovators and transfer the risk to other countries with an entirely different set of values. A confident cooperative model rooted in Western values and open participation offers a better path to both prosperity and safety." Mr. Griffiths, you've outlined both a few of the opportunities, but also some of the hesitation or maybe challenges in terms of AI and how it functions within the online sphere. But this is stating that overregulation is not the answer, despite some of these challenges. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed, I'll just be careful of my time here. This is a conversation that we could have for the better part of this afternoon. I would just point out that there are some very real challenges that overregulation represents, and I would point simply to the Online News Act. This committee, the Heritage Department, was critical in the whole legislative process that created the Online News Act that now sees Google provide $100 million in funding to news groups in order to comply with the terms of the Act. As a part of that agreement, the Online News Act and the regulation that it imposes on the news sector, all news organizations must make all of their content available to Google. So if you are a recipient of funding through the Online News Act, you are unable to prevent Google from scraping behind your paywall, scraping subscriber-only content to serve up in their LLM. So I think we need to understand that with every regulation, there are trade-offs. I'm sure the committee members are well aware of this and spend a lot of time reflecting on this. My point is that there are unintended consequences, and we're already seeing those emerge around the Online News Act and how this committee, the department, the government will, for example, look at copyright protection as it relates to news organizations, if in effect those rights have been signed over to Google in the context of the Online News Act. So I realize that's not a precise answer. There's so many different directions that we can go on this. But I do think that the Online News Act in some ways is a cautionary tale. It suggests the challenges of regulating this fast-changing environment. And now, unfortunately, news organizations are going to have to live within that act unless it's amended accordingly to provide them greater flexibility to protect their content and to monetize it in the context of the use of that content by various LLMs and search platforms.
So sorry, Mr. Griffith, thank you very much. I just want you to actually dive a little bit deeper into this. The Online News Act, Bill C-18, it did come through this committee. There were some challenges with that bill. There were questions that were raised. Go a little bit deeper in terms of in the Online News Act, then facilitate the potential demise ultimately of the Online News Act or Online News Act if AI to generate the type of content that it is currently generating in the sense of that are available at the top of our search page.
Yeah, so thank you, MP Thomas. People are actually using LLMs to get directly behind paywall. So pro tip, you can, if you confront a news website that has an article that is paywalled, you can ask most LLMs to summarize that article for you that's behind the paywall. The reason is that the LLM's bots have scraped all the content in that website that is behind the paywall. This is happening for two reasons. One, that Google requires you to make all of your content available to it. And if you choose to block its bots that are scraping your content for its AI LLM, it will block you from all search results. So there's a huge issue, I think, that needs to be taken up there, a question of real fundamental fairness with a company that's responsible for 90% of all search volume in Canada, telling news outlets like The Hub and others that if you prevent Google's AI bots from accessing content behind our paywall, we will disappear from all search results across a platform that serves the vast majority, if not all, of the organic traffic to our website. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, with the Online News Act, a condition of receiving funds from the Journalism Collective, which was established to disperse the funds, is that you have to make all the content you produce available to Google, to one specific AI company and to one specific LLM, and arguably to the most powerful one in the marketplace, the originator of AI overviews within your Chrome browser and the creator of Google AI Mode, which is something clearly that the company is investing in and that is rolling out across browsers in Canada and around the world. So you simply don't have a choice as a publisher right now, if you are accepting funds under the Online News Act, to block Google from scraping your content, including subscriber protected content, because again, you are a recipient of Online News Act funding. That is an issue that either this committee or someone obviously will have to take up, because it removes any bargaining power from a recipient of Online News Act funding to negotiate with Google over fair terms of what that content is worth to Google, to its LLM, to the clients and customers that are using its AI services.
Griffiths, and I turn now to Mr. Miles for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks so much. That was super interesting. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I'm going to just turn back to the creative question. I was an artist for 20 years, a songwriter. I can put into the generative AI, write me a David Miles song, and it will write me a song that sounds a lot like my other songs and uses my voice. Je vais essayer de parler en français avec vous.
I'll try to speak in French with you. It would be a question for Maryse. Arsky, please. I wonder if you could explain how AI models collect these data without breaking copyright. Where do we stand now? How can that be done? Is that information already open source as of now?
Très bonne question sur un
A very good question on a more general technical aspect. Technological stakeholders as a whole massively take up content that's already available on the web without necessarily obtaining prior authorization. There are a few exceptions where those stakeholders hold direct agreements with the producer, well, where they got authorization to use the content. If not, as was explained by Mr. Griffiths earlier, it's essentially technology stakeholders that we call bots that have a regular ongoing activity on different websites, and they harvest all the content and they store it in data sets, and they build up sources in order to feed into the artificial intelligence.
Pour mes chansons,
In my case, for my songs,
pas pour la permission.
they don't ask me permission for that to use them to create other songs that sound like mine. So where do things stand right now as regards that permission? There's none.
Il y a des
At the moment, there is none. There are
en construction.
groups that are reflecting or constructing models, if I can say that. They're essentially models based on a licensing or authorization model that would authorize those stakeholders to use those contents for the purposes of driving AI. But right now, they can just make whatever use they want of it. At present, the real question is that the right holders have no control over the content once it's available on the web. Copybeck has adopted a tool recently to make it possible to monitor robotic activities on websites, and we can see that there are robots that come and harvest content, even though the websites have already have a standard which sets out the rules for activities of those robots. Those robots do not consult it, or they simply don't care about this existing robot page, and they take the content anyway. I think that Marie-Julie has something to say. Did you have something? A very good explanation, but I think we can assume that they do so without respecting copyright law that doesn't allow them to use the data. So are there any matters before the Canadian courts that would illustrate the kind of legal problem that Canadian artists face in the era of generative AI? And if so, what are some of the key questions
Que cette question m'est adressée.
in those cases? Oh, I didn't realize it was for me. Listen, sure, at present, there are certain cases before the courts.
Pas une
Essentially,
présentement des actions collectives
there are
qui sont
class action cases that are still beginning because class action lawsuits, as they're called,
c'est un processus
are, well, it's a process that
en fait
is very specific and special when there's a lawsuit. There's one member that represents an entire category who will be able to
seulement
obtain possibly a judgment that would apply to a large number of members. So it's an instrument that appears to be one of the
privilégié par
instruments preferred by authors. And indeed, it tends to be authors as a general rule who are behind these class action lawsuits as of now.
essentiellement
So listen, essentially, sometimes there are pirate libraries that have been used or to generate things, sometimes other procedures. We have not yet
sur
got a case law as to how the law would be ultimately interpreted. So when I talked to you earlier,
mon message.
let me go back to my message again. When I was saying earlier that going before the courts, it's one way to find out
Dire
what the judges will say on what are essentially new cases, and they're complex cases too. I like to think
lequel je
that the group I'm appearing before, who are people who indeed have the power to legislate, will be able to ensure
que
that
fondamental
the fundamental issues that I raised earlier when I was making my remarks could be respected. In particular, the issue of transparency, the result being that,
sujet
if you wish, I could speak at length on the issue of transparency.
important
It's very important. In other words, to the extent that we don't know which works have been used in order to feed into those models, in a sense, as a way of speaking, it's a kind of a denial of rights. In other words, we don't know what was used. So transparency would make it possible to get access to whatever has been used as whatever protected works may have been used. So while I have the floor, I'm very sorry, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Notre
I hope you have another opportunity to continue.
Monsieur Shampoo.
The next one will be Mr. Shampoo for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say I find it unfortunate to have limited time like this because we could listen to our witnesses for a long period of time. Professor Anti, I would like to hear from you. We certainly legislated 20 years too late on digital platforms with the bill on broadcasting that was done by this committee, among others. How many years are we behind to regulate artificial intelligence, in your opinion? Well, listen, it was not so obvious in the early 2020s. We were still unsure about the capacity that these artificial intelligence systems would be able to develop. There were a few ingredients missing for them to be reliable and to create results that would have a commercial value or other types of value. But as of 2023, there was no doubt that in a number of ways, not only dealing with text, we're talking about large language models or LLMs, and we're talking about multimode models, which are able to navigate through all the frameworks where there is information stored digitally, which means it includes music, voices, video, and images. So those models are now huge and of a size that is unknown because there's no scientific transparency in the publications put out by the major industry stakeholders. So we're not aware of what data is used as a feedstock. We're not aware of what's being used. So today we have the certainty that they're going to continue to improve at a huge speed. Do you think that it is still possible to believe that there may be some coexistence between, let's say, content creators and artificial intelligence, that we should be afraid of AI or that we should consider it simply as a tool that can be used by content creators? Because I have the impression that we're in a reactive mode right now, of course, because we're dealing with these types of problems here, but we're more in a reactive mode. So how could we use it in such a way that it would become a tool that would respect copyright, but also be used to artists to develop new markets or new content? Do you think that there's still some way to achieve that with appropriate regulation? Yes, well, there is no problem with artists using AI tools as they use other technology and all other materials or tools that can contribute to cultural development and creativity. The problem is controlling the digital infrastructure which is necessary to do so and the scale of cultural production. So it's extremely important to understand the difference between a possible alliance between NVIDIA and Disney Plus to create a new Star Wars series based on AI as a scenario in which cultural creators could use AI to accelerate and increase their productivity and explore new fields of creation. That is what causes me to respond. Why? Because AI is going to have huge advantages in a number of sectors. It's still the case in science, in teaching. It's the case in a number of professions, because professional acts and the responsibility, the civil responsibility, the liability of the people involved remains at a human level. But it is now possible to create productions that claim to be cultural, but that have no possibility of traceability or of liability for individuals or organizations behind it. That's the distinction. What people are amazed by, with all the possibilities to explain, is also what is very frightening to others, including myself. I panic at the idea that AI could become quasi autonomous, and with generative AI and AI being developed, it's been a number of experts are concerned about superintelligence. In other words, an artificial intelligence that would be autonomous and that would feed into itself. If we reach that level without regulations and a regulatory framework that is appropriate, could it be quite simply the end of artistic creation as we know it? Well, if superintelligence appears someday, culture will be the last of our concerns. Yes, well, I would prefer to be on the National Defense Committee to discuss that topic, but actually we don't know. But of course, it is something that the greatest experts, for example, Michel Benjo and Mila in Montreal, is working on that, and it's important to secure that. But you have to understand that there is a step that is certain, which is that AI is becoming more and more agentic AI, and it's multi-agentic. What this means is that one creates systems with a number of specialized AI models that are able to provide production models or chains of production, and that's or production lines. That's where, for example, you could replace all the artists for the creation of films in a production studio. They could decide to do that. So you have AI screenwriters that propose scripts that would then you would have other AI sectors that would do first scenes, and all that would be automated. And small video games are produced with 5 AI systems, so that all you have to do is give an idea to start with, and then in a few hours you have a complete video game that comes out. So that's what is coming. I think I'll have to sign up for a new course because time goes by and I ask questions, but we'll continue that later. Thank you, Mr. Antil. Thank you very much, Mr. Généreux. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. It's very important and interesting as a discussion. I'll continue with Mr. Antil, if you will. You stated some very important things earlier about theft and pillaging, and I'll come back to the people from Copybeck. It's important to use these words. Imagine Mr. Miles, who is a singer or was part of a music band, is imagine he's a computer crackpot and AI expert, and in his life he made music, and today he creates the same music with AI. Would you consider that Mr. Miles is still an artist? Personally, Mr. Miles uses his own data to have an artistic process of the montage and editing. Sure, he's still a musician and an artist. However, if I make an album based on the data drawn from Mr. Miles, among others, and if I bring out an album and I claim that it's a pseudonym that is not my own name and that I demand the copyright for that production, to me it is theft. Perfect. I understand the difference. Now let's imagine Mr. Miles, like myself. I've never done any music. I never did any singing or writing music, fortunately for everyone, and I will never claim to be an artist in any sense. However, I could become an AI crackpot and decide that I want to create music myself. So even to create a system that itself is going to create music. Would you consider that I am an artist? Because I would be creating something out of an AI tool. I would say that you're someone who, you said that you would develop a system based on AI that helps artists to create, if I understood. No, I would create it myself. Let's say the idea of my question, what's behind that is, I, Bernard Généreux, decide to create a work based on tools that now exist, that are available to everyone. I would create a work and I send it out into the universe on the internet. Would you consider me an artist? No. Okay. The people from Copybeck and the Coalition of Culture, would you consider me as an artist?
C'est une bonne question.
It's a good question. It's a fair question, because even if I never made any music, I might decide I want to do some music, but with AI tools, sorry for the mic, with the tools, which already young people do on a day-to-day basis. But I understand that if they take works from Mr. Miles, for example, and decide to make an album, and then they copy some components of what they did, it could be considered as a theft. However, if they come and steal my things, you wouldn't be stealing anything. You know, I'm just making that up based on nothing, just based on the tools of artificial intelligence. Would you consider me an author or an artist?
Un début de réponse à ça, puis je vais laisser.
To begin, I'll start the answer and I'll let my colleagues continue.
Pratico-pratique.
So essentially, from a practical level, I don't think we can consider you as being an artist, because you use tools that they themselves drew on human creations or artist creations. So
Grise.
it remains a gray area somewhere along the line regarding the use of artificial intelligence.
Il existe, on l'a fait avec toi, avec
I think we've seen this with
à partir de ce
some of the C27. There exist standards now,
en Europe.
or normative standards in Europe and the USA to supervise the use of AI. There are not in Canada because C27 unfortunately fell by the wayside, fortunately or unfortunately. And do you still think it's necessary today? They'll have a bill. I don't know if it's in the Liberal agenda. Do you think it's still important or necessary to bring forward or to create a regulated environment in Canada? No.
Oui. Ben, la réponse est oui.
Yes, the answer is yes. Absolutely. There's still room for that. In fact, our current Copyright Act is good as far as AI is concerned. There are some things to be improved in copyright law in general, but as regards generative AI in Canada, according to the Act, one must request the authorization before using works. As concerns copyright legislation, it should be left as it is. But as regards transparency, yes, we should legislate, and I hope it'll be done soon in order to have what they have in the European Union. They have an AI provision that requires a sufficiently detailed summary of the data used. Thank you.
Roy.
Next, Ms. Royer.
Merci, Madam Chair, esteemed colleagues, and our panel. I'm not much of a musician to my colleague opposite, but I do identify as a visual artist. In my 11 years on Port Moody City Council, known as City of the Arts, for the better part of that time, I chaired the Civic Arts and Culture Committee, among many other committees, but worked very, very closely with artists over that time. And as a side fact, I also had an art gallery for several years before COVID and curated approximately 40 exhibitions during that time, featuring the work of emerging and professional West Coast artists. I know that my question is actually for Ms. Desrochers. You mentioned returning from a conference with over 100 cultural ministers, and you touched on the pillars: authorization, compensation, and transparency. Can you drill down a little bit deeper? I know that artists in my community care about these pillars.
Oui, alors, ben, en ce qui concerne l'autorisation,
when it comes to the authorization, as I said, this is for the Copyright Act. When it comes to remuneration, then this is we must have a license market that will develop, and for that we need the last pillar, which is transparency. So this is transparency that can be found in a bill that would be specifically about AI. We saw in C27 that creators were included, but too late, unfortunately, in the discussions. And what we're hoping right now, and we are really happy to be heard today, is that next time there will be a bill that will be talk about generative AI, we will have a discussion right off the bat.
vous en lire.
I can read you some declarations that were very happy. We have more than 100 Minister of Cultures who committed to encourage a decent work for all artists, encourage proper remuneration, proper support and protection, respecting labor norms, respecting economic and social objectives, encouraging transition to formal economy, and to fight against systemic inequities. And this was a commitment that was done also by Canada, and we simply have to turn those commitments into action.
Thank you very much. And I know that Canada's not alone in facing
Alors,
challenge. How can we work better with like-minded countries to implement and promote these ethical, transparent AI practices?
Alors, je pense qu'une piste à explorer certainement.
I think that's something we could explore. I told you that we found our work on the 2005 UNESCO Convention.
Group de 18
There is a group of 18 experts at UNESCO who recommended recently that we add an additional protocol to the convention to improve its implementation and to recognize the challenges that we have in the numeric world because of the generative AI. There are 159 countries at the UNESCO that have the possibility of move to action to adopt this protocol. And we hope that Canada will continue to be the leader it has always been, and that it will support this protocol. It will be discussed next time at the UNESCO in February, and we certainly hope that the next country will continue, and Canada can certainly play a role here.
Merci. Of course, large
Thank you.
have the resources to navigate some of these shifts, but many independent artists do not. What practical steps could help ensure that all creators, not just the biggest players, benefit from AI responsibility and fairly?
Alors là, je pense qu'il faut, c'est un autre.
Well, another major observation is to ensure, as I mentioned before, that the cultural sector is involved in the decisions made. For example, the work we're doing at the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions is to pull together the organizations. We also represent Visual Arts, CARFAC, and member of the coalition. Rav is a member of the coalition. So we bring together all these organizations in Canada, Quebec, Canada, the Francophone minorities to discuss together. We invite lawyers, we share expertise, and a maximum of stakeholders, and it's simply to come to us, to listen to us when the time comes to develop public policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Et prochainement, Monsieur.
And next, Mr. Champoux, you have 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes, Mr. Antil. Can't I go into Copilot to get a summary? If you could provide me with short answers, it would be highly appreciated. There were news that came out this week that drew my attention on AI, which is called Claude, which you may have heard of, which detected that we are in the process of testing it or questioning it. And it said, "Are you testing me?" or something like that. I don't know if you heard about that. But earlier, when we talked about superintelligence, maybe I went far in the example, but the development of AI leads us sometimes into areas that can be of concern. What we saw this week with that artificial intelligence engine would be such that one day AI may refuse to be regulated. It could detect that we're setting parameters and decide to avoid that. Could we see a scenario like that? Certainly. In fact, there are already AI systems which find solutions to avoid regulatory barriers, for example, paywalls, when navigating per se. And perhaps I'll just wind up by saying that it's good news that the security risks have been shared by Anthropic, which is a company that is very much admired for its ethical approach and security approach to AI, and it shares with us the risks that are discovered in the context of experiments and in the development phase. It's important, in particular, to avoid dangerous systems from being deployed. Thank you. Let me come back to the cultural sector and the impact of AI on the cultural sector. In your opinion, have we reached a point of no return for certain professions connected to artistic creation? Are there some sectors where we say it's over now, we've gone too far with AI to say that we'll be able to come back to those occupations? Do you have examples? There are 2 occupations I see that will be transformed definitively. Graphic illustrators that use digital tools compared to painters who use paint brushes and paint and so forth, or those who use Adobe software. In my case, with Adobe augmented by AI, I can make works that would be perceived as being talented, and I can assure you that I have no talent. And of course, dubbing for translations. That's something very important in Quebec, as you're aware. There's a lot of dubbing that we do, foreign productions, particularly from the USA. And I have the impression that that work is, unfortunately, ending. It's reaching the end of a period and will become artisanal. So that's quite a sign that it's urgent to protect our sectors, particularly those in Quebec. Thank you very much, Mr. Antil. Thank you, Mr. Champoux.
Floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, artificial intelligence represents a major growth opportunity for this country. I think if you look at the last 10 years, you know, I look at this country, our Canadian productivity has gone down, our prosperity is being questioned in every province, and even our economic well-being. I've looked at AI, and even the newspapers are really, every day in this country, they're talking about AI, because if we get left behind, we will be a third world country if we're not already. And I'm just going to maybe talk to the hub here, Mr. Griffiths. It's just moving quick. And I know when you move quick, there will be some mistakes. But at the same time, if you don't move quick, you'll get left behind. And I think that's what's happening here. I hope legislatures do not block progressive AI, because we need this in this country. Almost every publication that I have read said, and there's a danger here that people in Parliament or elsewhere are going to block AI, and then we get left behind. I want to talk to you because you've started up a few years. You have 2 million people go through your independent publisher, and I just want to know how you did it and if AI had any effect on you.
Yeah. So look, I'm glad we're getting to this line of questioning. There are significant productivity gains, obviously, that you know, a variety of types of businesses are experiencing through the adoption of AI. And I think the news industry, largely because so much of the LLMs were trained on the output of that industry, is in many ways well positioned to use the types of outputs that the LLMs produce to, as I explained earlier, enhance various aspects of news gathering, synthesis, and dissemination. You're right, we have a profound productivity problem in Canada. AI surely is a piece of that solution. I think what we need to try to figure out, and this by no means will be easy, is how to ensure fair competition. We are in favor of competition at the Hub. We like the idea that, in fact, wouldn't it be great in the news industry if people actually competed on the basis of the content they produced and the audiences that they were able to bring to that content, as opposed to, as we now compete in Canada largely in the news industry, on the basis of how many full-time employees you have and how many subsidies that you can claim as a result of those full-time employees. I think that's an apt analogy to understand the opportunity of the applications of some of these AI technologies to our own industry, to news and publishing. There's all kinds of tools now that this technology gives me as a smaller publisher to compete with my larger peers. I'm able to do investigative journalism in a way I could never have done even 6 or 12 months ago on a scale that is would only have been afforded a newsroom of the type and size that you would have seen, let's say, at the Globe and Mail. So I think that your through line through this debate should be, where is competition enabled and where is competition thwarted? And I think there are smart ways to have a view on AI, to regulate AI that furthers competition overall. I don't think it's fair, and this is where I'll end, to go back to what I said earlier, where I, as a news publisher, am forced to give away the content behind my paywall to, in this case, Google, who is responsible for serving 90% of all search volume across Canada. And if I install Cloudflare software that prevents Google's AI bots from crawling my subscriber-only content behind my paywall, I will be removed from all search across all Google platforms. That is not competitive. That is anti-competitive. That is the abuse of a monopolistic position in a marketplace by a company who is absolutely dominant in the search category. So I will end on that and say that you're right to focus on competition. You're right to focus on productivity.
Okay, last question here. Online News Act, C-18. Google essentially for 100 million has everybody under their wrap now. And that's what you just,
Correct.
Google controls the map on every news outlet other than yours in this country because they paid $100 million and now have all the stories coming through them, and they'll dictate who goes number 1 and who goes number 10.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes. So as I said before, the Online News Act, a condition of receipt of funds from the journalism collective, you as a news recipient of those funds have to give all your content over to Google. You could not install bots on your website as a group funded under the Online News Act to prevent Google from crawling your subscriber protected content or any other content you have, because then you would be in violation of your funding terms with the online collective. So there is a delicious problem that needs to be figured out here by all of you.
Mr. Al-Soud, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci, Madame la Présidente. So early on, this committee found consensus on the importance of undergoing studies on the impact of AI on Canadian culture and heritage. I say studies because I suspect some of my colleagues here share, I think every committee should be undergoing a similar study on AI. So thank you for agreeing to be part of ours. I will start with this first question, and I hope it speaks to the importance of human-centric design. Avia has recurringly spoken to this, but I'm open to thoughts from all, of course, including Professor Engel. You've described the need to, and I quote, put living beings at the center of AI development. What does that look like in practical regulatory terms?
Alors, en termes de politique publique et législative.
In terms of legislative policy, in my opinion, it would be to see where humans are not in control. In other words, where there are vulnerabilities which have changed on account of the systems in question. So public policies, legislations that aim to protect, for example, professions which previously were not being protected because there was no need felt, for example, arts and culture. And it seems to me that's a way of putting humans at the focus of the legislative work, because internet, and Mr. Griffiths talked about that earlier, it's absolutely dominated by the digital giants, the big tech USA, which have absolutely no consideration for vulnerable people or vulnerable industries, and even less so for small cultural industries in Quebec and Canada. So to me, placing the human being at the center of the legislation and public policy means protecting the most vulnerable.
Justement sur ce sujet.
Precisely on that topic of protecting those who are a bit more vulnerable, we often talk about the risk of AI and disinformation and job losses, but not so much about the ecosystem of a healthy AI ecosystem. What do you find in the indicators of an environment that is beneficial ethically and sociologically? Just the distribution of capacities of access to artificial intelligence. At present, there are already inequalities and inequities due to the fact that Canada is not proposing any solution of competitive AI with the American competitors. I would hope that certain investments that have been announced will make it possible to make a difference. But eventually, we're facing inequality of access to superior performance. For example, ChatGPT Pro subscription or ChatGPT Plus is not accessible to most people, so they use the free service. Now, as regards businesses, it's the same thing. There are going to be services that will cost thousands of dollars extra per month to have access to the higher capacity, and it's going to provide competitive advantages that are absurdly out of proportion for those companies that have the capitals to make strategic partnerships with big tech. So it's a simple ecosystem, but it's one that avoids monopolies and oligopolies, and that would create a counter power for our industries and for our workers right here to be able to compete and innovate. And I agree with what Mr. Griffiths said on that, the importance of that. But you have to see it too as an unequal power relationship. That's why digital sovereignty is closely connected with cultural sovereignty for all non-American and non-Chinese countries.
Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor. My next question is on the work that you do that is very interdisciplinary. How can we, as a parliament, better integrate social sciences and not just the technical side of artificial intelligence when we talk about creating a framework that would work for Canadians? A very good question. It's difficult to answer. I would say just briefly, artificial intelligence is a different technology from the others because it is the most human technology. In other words, it's based on data produced by human activity and human intelligence itself. So in that context, we need a number of viewpoints and areas of expertise. For example, AI can have mental health advantages, but also create addictions. So from the viewpoint of psychologists and psychiatrists, the study that we need their viewpoint, and transferability is it can also be used by anyone. So people who are 80 can use ChatGPT and can use DALL-E to generate images or Sono to generate music because we all master the basic language of that technology, which is not programming, but natural language, English or French, and so on. So as a result, it's very difficult to identify the issues of a technology that increases the human capacity or amplifies it, that has ongoing contact with humans, and we don't yet have the definitive approaches to understand these phenomena at the same time when the technology is making giant steps forward and where the deployment in society is not really being controlled or subject to legislation, and there's no accreditation of it regarding risks and dangers. Thank you. My apologies. I don't like to cut people off, but we have time limits.
Floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. This is to Mr. Griffiths once again. Fascinating observations and so forth. The one that strikes me is that the AI tools, basically, you can do a Google search now and it scrapes all the content from people's websites, whether they have it behind a paywall or not. That's obviously a big challenge. Is there any advantage to Canadian news sites to this phenomenon?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think there are some advantages. To be fair to Google, they have indicated that the quality of the traffic that clicks through from an AI overview or from a search query undertaken in AI mode, it has a better effect for you as the publisher. The user stays around longer, they engage more with your content. Now, Google has not released any information to actually document this. And again, I think transparency is important. If large public companies are going to make claims about how their technology is beneficial, then I think there's an onus on releasing the data to back up these types of assertions. So I think there is a quality of traffic issue, but nonetheless, even though there might be a quality of traffic issue, the Pew Center in the United States, a well-respected foundation, did a study looking at behaviors within AI overview and these types of summaries that are produced for topical queries on news and other relevant information. And in many cases found that the click-through rate from those AI summaries to a news outlet like The Hub was in the single digits. So 5%, 6%, 7% or less of users clicking through. So I go back to my original point. This technology is helping news and journalism. It is empowering journalists. It is dealing often with the asymmetry between smaller organizations like The Hub, larger competitors, large organizations like the Globe and Mail, or others who have to deal with reporting out on even larger organizations like the federal government, for example. So there's all kinds of positive things that are happening for the industry related to AI. But I go back to issues of competition, issues of fairness and transparency. And there, I think there is work that needs to be done.
So just on that note, you don't strike me as somebody who likes a lot of government interference. However, what could we do? What would you like to see if you could wave a magic wand to improve the situation? Online journalists.
Yeah. Well, I think necessity is the mother of invention, and I would urge that we take away all the subsidies and supports that are out there, and we allow competition to occur on a level playing field in our industry, like we should be allowing it to occur, as we know, in other industries like telecommunications or banking. I think this would do more to address Canada's productivity problems than anything else that we could consider at this time. With regards to the actual technology itself and the large operators of this technology, clearly there are big challenges in terms of asserting issues of transparency and fairness in their dealings with content creators of all types, from the spectrum of news through to visual and other types of artistry. So I think we have to look at that. Ideally, I think copyright law probably should be where we should start and end that conversation. I would be very leery if the conversation skews into more subsidies, that we need to find more ways to create, in a sense, an artificial economic foundation for industries that are challenged, because I think those subsidies distort free and fair competition, and they ultimately lead to poorer outcomes for consumers. We certainly see that in the news industry in Canada.
Right now, if you Google something, AI searches are basically controlled by Google. Is there any way around that? Is there anything that the government could do so that Google doesn't basically algorithms to point people to different certain websites?
Correct. So I think there is a concern that right now it is entirely at the whim of Google and the other LLMs. If they do put a citation into that AI overview, or if you're in AI mode in Google, it is that company that is choosing which organization gets cited. These companies are entering into agreements with different news outlets. Those agreements are private. We don't know what's in them, but we know now that companies that the LLMs enter into agreements to get preferential citing in these summaries. It creates other distortions in the market. As a smaller publisher compared to the New York Times or Fox News or whatever, we are pushed aside and not able to compete on a level playing field.
Next, I have Mr. Al-Soud for 5 minutes.
Thank you, merci. J'aimerais commencer par remercier Copybec.
I would like to start by thanking Copybec. You were the first organization with whom I had a conversation on the impact of AI on our culture and Canadian heritage since I became an MP. And I recall during our conversation that you are very clear that it's not an issue of avoiding technological improvements, knowing that they'll come anyway, but it's an issue of ensuring that it's done so in a way that considers our industry and culture. The AI models were mentioned a number of times, and they're now drawing on a huge corpus of texts, many of which are protected by copyright. From your viewpoint, what would be a fair and functional form of compensation for users of copyright, for rights holders? Thank you for your question, sir. A very good question, very relevant on the aspect of the valuing or monetization of the content. Indeed, what we observe with generative AI is that there's a new redistribution of value. In that sense, artificial intelligence generates revenues that are quite considerable, to my mind. And these are aspects which were mentioned earlier. These are subscriptions, Pro and Plus, and so on, with astronomical revenues, if we just look at the investments made in those technologies too. So as of now, the relationship of power is unequal in the sense that authors cannot negotiate individually. Hence, a legislative response that is structured would be needed to respond to that situation. So redistribution of value must be done fairly so that the rights holders that produced or the creator who produced the content that was used for the AI should be fairly compensated.
Qui commence à voir
There are certain models that are starting to take shape. They're exploratory models based on programming to be able to compensate the rights holders, but we consider that these models are very limited because, once again, it comes back to the technology stakeholders that set them up, and those stakeholders have complete control of the operation of those models. So the rights holders no longer have any choice, in a sense, or cannot make their own choices to accept the use of the content or not, and to the value of their content. Thank you for this comprehensive response. My next question, applying copyright is sometimes perceived by the public as hostile to users. It's been mentioned several times today. How can organizations such as yours ensure that copyright is connected to fairness and sustainability rather than restriction of AI?
Si je peux me permettre.
If I may.
Mon micro est ouvert. Si je peux me permettre.
Okay, my mic is on. So, if I may,
En fait, de la loi.
the idea of the Copyright Act at the basics is to ensure that someone who creates a work can receive royalties. So it's a compensation for a work that is done, which is of a very particular nature compared to employer-employee work, but is nevertheless the purpose that is sought. Accordingly, rather than seeing it as a restriction, it should be seen instead as a way for our sovereignty in Canada to have a wealth, a collective wealth that we can share that has a value. And I don't think that it's by opposing the users against the creators that we would be able to bring this out. In other words, monetization of creation is also an economic asset to our country. That is how I would answer if I had to do so, and I think I just did. If I may also add, data produced by humans are considered as essential to AI. There are models that have tried to self-generate content to feed into those models, but it didn't really work. So the fact that there's a recognition of the value of the content generated by humans is also a recognition that this content should be compensated at its fair value to the creator. Thank you.
Mr. Champoux, vous avez...
Mr. Champoux, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes, not 10.
Vous êtes de retour de Mondiacool.
So, you're back from Mondiacool. You were there until last week. It was a big conference, as you said. A number of stakeholders in the cultural scene organized by UNESCO, 100 culture ministers. Did you feel the same urgency to take action on artificial intelligence on behalf of the countries that were there in Mondiacool? Absolutely. It was a remarkable consensus, and clearly there may be a few dissident countries that are less enthusiastic about it. But the vast majority of the discussions that I heard on artificial generative intelligence was discourse that recognized that it's urgent to act, that it's necessary to support intellectual property, and recognize the need to adopt measures for transparency and emphasize the human nature of the creative act, and that emphasize the importance of arts and culture for social cohesion, for the construction of our identities, for the protection of minority voices throughout the world, because protecting diversity of cultural expression means protecting each person in Canada. And when you're at UNESCO, we often repeat that, leave no one behind. So this is a very inspiring consensus. It's very interesting what you just said. I was at Mondiacool and the Mexico edition a few years ago, and there were certain countries that were at some of the conferences, and we had conversations with some of the smaller African countries. And they said, how do you want us to stand up to multinationals whose business volume is higher than our GDP. We can't do that. Do you think that there is a country that is going to stand out and act as a leader? We often hear about Europe advancing faster than others. Do you think that Canada could finally act as a leader in the field and take a position to regulate artificial intelligence, and including other countries, including vulnerable ones? I hope Canada will continue to play a leadership role as an aspiring country. I think that we can turn to Brazil. When I talked earlier about the additional protocol to the 2005 protocol, there's a strong will of the Brazilian Minister of Culture, who is an artist, who spoke at UNESCO. And there were three countries, or more than three, but there were three major speeches on the protocol, one from the Brazilian Minister of Culture, one from Stephen Guilbeault, and one from Quebec's Culture Minister, Mathieu Lacombe. So I hope that there will be a political will, a real one. And yes, we have to act internationally. Yes, we have to work together, but we mustn't wait. We can take action now in Canada. And now artificial intelligence is standing on the shoulders of various ministers. But I'm pleased because on the radio this week, I heard Minister Mélanie Joly say that it's important to take action on artificial intelligence and generative AI. We also heard Mr. Solomon showing sensitivity toward our issues, and we meet with that person and this week. And I hope there'll be synergy between the different parties and the departments to have concrete action at the Canadian level. Thank you.
Thomas, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Griffith, you've been talking a lot about the pros and cons of regulation. I want to drill down on regulation and striking the balance in terms of creating competition, both among, domestically, I guess I would say, but also our country competing against other countries. Where's that balance? Where's that balance in terms of to what extent should AI be regulated in order for us to stay competitive as a nation and for our creators and journalists to be competitive among one another within Canada? Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult question. So what do we have to consider when we are looking to strike that balance, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Well, MP Thomas, these are complicated questions. I think we just have to prepare ourselves for change, prepare ourselves for things to be different than they were in the past, for industries to adapt. Some of that, no doubt, will require patience. It will require foresight. There will be what we call structural readjustments, some of which could be painful. But the alternative might be more painful, to try to freeze the Canadian economy in place, to try to protect whole swaths, industries from this disruptive technology, I think would be prohibitively expensive and ultimately significantly, again, undermine the issues that we really need to be working on, which are gains in our productivity and our ability to create the shared wealth that underwrites, among many things, Canada's generous social program. So I don't think I have a conclusive answer for you. I think, though, that we need to have a sense of our ingenuity and our capability to manage through this, and some confidence in ourselves that this technology, like other ways of technology, from electrification to the invention of steam power, Canada saw itself through those eras. In many ways, those technologies were transformative to Canada's growth and to this country leaping ahead with the rest of the world. So we need to be integrated with the world. We need to be using the world's technologies. And we need to, again, just have a sense of our own resiliency and our ability to meet this challenge together, frankly, with a minimum, I would say the bare minimum of intervention. Use something like the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, indeed. But to step beyond that, as we have in other ways, through large-scale regulation of the Canadian economy, especially my own industry, journalism, I think we're starting to see the pernicious effects of that approach.
So interestingly enough, in the creative sector, we moved from radio to television. We moved from television to the internet, from just the internet 1.0 now to, the use of AI. obviously as a country, we've wanted to go along this path of development. It's benefited us overall, but no doubt there's been some fear, along the way at each one of those junctures.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say in terms of your observations with regards to, the place we find ourselves right now in terms of this historic moment?
Mm-hmm. Look, it's a moment of profound dislocation, and there will be winners and losers, as we move through, just as we move through those other eras of dislocation. But the point was that we left the horse and buggy behind. We're not driving in horse and buggies today because we understood that industry was supplanted by a new industry, the internal combustion engine. I think we're in the middle of a transformation like that now, and we went from making horse tackle to having automotive parts plants in Ontario. We will go through this. We will come out the other side. I would just go back to, maybe a challenge to the committee. What are your core principles? I would say competition, fairness, and transparency would be some good ones to start with. But I think trying to protect entire industries, trying to stop the dislocation, trying to stop the disruption, is a difficult task, an expensive one, and will have all kinds of unintended effects and consequences down the road, as we're seeing with the Online News Act now, making all the recipients of the Online News Act, in a sense, as one of your colleagues said, under the thumb of Google, because they've signed away all the rights to their intellectual property as a result of receiving supports through the journalism collective that's managing these funds on behalf of the government and Google.
And I think within your framework there, you used a really key phrase, and that is, you said, winners and losers as we progress, as we move forward. I think the difference there, though, is that naturally, when a society evolves, there is competition, and there are winners and there are losers. When the government overregulates, however, the government then is picking the winners and losers rather than allowing to simply give to winners and losers naturally. Do you wish to comment on that at all?
Thank you. There's no time to answer that. Sorry. Mrs.
Excellent question.
Monsieur Ntumba, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and hello, everyone. Hello to those who are online. I'd like to start with our friends from Quebec, whom I spoke with during the summer, during the parliamentary holiday in Mont-Saint-Bruno-L'Acadie, which I represent. The Francophone community is central to the community, and how can AI influence the distribution of local works, first of all? Secondly, how can Quebec consider the protection of copyright in a context where AI could automate access and production of digital works? It's a very local question, at the same time one that is very general. That's the way I see it.
Moi, ce qui me fait plaisir, c'est que je suis
What I'm happy about is that I'm here along with the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. We're part of that coalition because we are a management society that deals with reproduction rights, and it's a very major concern for us, AI is. But when you talk about all the different sectors that are currently being impacted by artificial intelligence, and earlier there were some questions about music and questions about audiovisual, and I won't necessarily mention all the sectors, books and illustration. So, and the issues are huge. So I cannot answer your question definitively. And once again, I could turn the question back to the legislator who can assist us in regulating a market that for the time being has remained without any known legislative object because C27 died on the order paper. And as my colleague said so clearly, the culture sector, when the time came to analyze Part 3 of Bill C27 that dealt with the issues that interest us here, we were among the last to come in and make observations. It's as though that phenomenon where a phenomenon of huge companies, of big tech, and of the tech sector, and that culture was something that is sort of along the sidelines. So I think that when we try, and we thank you for conducting this study on creative industries and on creators, which we are trying to place at the focus of our conversation today, to say how much to us, the individuals, the authors, the creators, whoever they may be, and the creative industries that are of various sizes and that are all over the territory, including in your district, may finally be able to work and operate with the aspects we discussed in our presentation. In other words, having an authorization requested and compensation and transparency. So if we have these keys in hand, I'm not saying there will be no challenges, but to us, we'll have some instruments that can help us to move forward. Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Desrosiers, you participated in a lot of international activities, but according to you, what are the main threats of AI on Canadian cultural diversity, particularly online? Well, first of all, it's the value chain that has been broken. So it's not that complicated. It's a matter of theft. When something is stolen, there is someone who loses and is no longer paid for the work they do. Not only is the work stolen at the source, but new competition is created, new competitors that take their place in the market. So it's a twofold loss. The first challenge is there. Secondly, there are many challenges that are added for diversity of cultural expression that are social challenges that all ought to be of concern to us. So we can think about data use. Is there something there? You can hear my Quebec accent. There are also Francophone communities. There are minorities that are concerned about not recognizing their culture in the generative AI models. And I don't know if I mentioned that, but there are also bridges being built in the coalition with Indigenous organizations, and there are in fact very inspiring projects underway. There's the Heritage Lab, which is developing an artificial intelligence model that is closed in based on data that are, I believe, in Inuktitut, and it's based on data available in the education system. And they're building a generative AI that will enable them, first of all, to do translation, to revitalize a threatened language, and to give access to heritage through a system that's being developed. So if we talk about the major companies, minority groups are not represented and are not being handled adequately with regard to the socioeconomic conditions in particular. Thank you very much. That's all.
Third round, because we started this committee late, but I do have a question before we move on to the next round. Mr. Griffiths, I was really interested at the top of your introduction when you said 60% of Google searches aren't getting any click-through anymore, that people are just to access the information, and they're not going beyond that. And it reminded me of a story I heard from an author of The Beaverton, which I'm sure you know is a parody and is written for humor. And that author's work was being used, and I don't remember the exact details, but it was something like PEI is 13 minutes off the rest of the country because of something funny with daylight savings time. So it was clearly written. AI was directing people to that article as proof. And so if people aren't clicking through, they're not checking their sources, like, is this not a big danger to our society? Are we teaching people not to think for themselves, to just trust your sources? I'll give you a minute to respond, mais aussi s'il y a des
But also, if there are other witnesses that want to answer that, then I would like to hear from you as well.
Sure, I'll be brief to allow the time for my fellow witnesses to weigh in on that too. Accuracy is an issue, and there are many cases where the citations or sources in these AI overviews are simply not accurate. The AI is either hallucinating or it's pulling from a source that, as you say, is parody. It's not a news source. I think there has been improvement over the last year, and I think some of the companies, maybe Google notably, should be acknowledged for addressing this problem and understanding that it is that is a problem. I think I go back to the fundamental point, though, that this is powerful technology. The reason people aren't clicking through is because it is performing a service. It is, in a sense, performing the service of you having to go to all those websites to read everything in them. And yes, that would be wonderful. There might be all kinds of serendipity, and you would learn all kinds of different things that you didn't know when you started in that search journey or process. But I think we need to understand that this technology is here to stay precisely because 60% of searches are now zero click. That is a sign that people are embracing the efficiency of this technology, the service that it is providing. So I think we are in this world now. We have left the old world behind of the top 10 ranked search results for you, those blue links that we all clicked on for about 25 years. That is gone. And we are in a new world, I think, of increasingly of AI overviews, of, in a sense, these platforms now acting as publishers. They are not simply searching out the information, cataloging the information. They are now, in a sense, stepping in very much like the role of my organization to synthesize that information for you and present it to you. That is the brave new world that we are in, and I do not think we are going to leave it anytime in the future.
See over introspection. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres?
Yes.
Any other witnesses? Mr. Rab? Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I would like to pick up on the response that Mr. Griffiths just gave. Any platform, any computerized platform, its goal to interact with consumers, its main goal is to keep the maximum users on the same platform. So the fact that you refer to source links, in our opinion, was done by those stakeholders to respond to a transparency concern. When ChatGPT came out, there were no referrals. It went directly to summaries. So this brings me back to an important point that we want to express today. Transparency and ethics are very important pillars for the use of materials in AI. That way you can know what data was used and what is the accuracy of the output, hence the importance of the quality of the information that is fed into these AI systems. So it joins up somewhere along the line with the high-level demand of the cultural sector to have transparency and a principle of ethics on the use of content that is produced by humans. I'll give the floor to my colleague. I'll just hear Ms. Desrosiers for a moment, and then we'll continue with the next ones.
J'aurais simplement dit que votre question renvoie
I just want to say that your question
dans l'environnement dans lequel nous
touches on what's being done in certain platforms. The digital environment was not very good from the beginning for cultural diversity. Right now, we're very far from a situation where there is an over-regulation of the sector. We need to reestablish a balance in a market that is an oligopoly, essentially, whether it's for discoverability, for artificial generative intelligence. And that's what the regulations could do, is bring back a bit of balance. And UNESCO, if I go back to the idea of rethinking the policies, that document published by UNESCO, 3% of the content consumed in the world only comes from the African continent. So there's a huge imbalance. There's an imbalance even within Canada, and there are imbalances around the world. And we need regulations, and we need to act to reestablish those dynamics in a market dominated by a small number of highly dominant platforms. Thank you very much, everyone. Mr. Généreux, you have 5 minutes. We'll begin the next round. Thank you, Chair. Thank you once again to all the witnesses. It's really very interesting. I was with Mr. Numba in Toronto last week at l'ASEF, which is the Canadian Association of Educators, French language minority situation educators. And in one of the trainings that we received on artificial intelligence, Mr. Saad, you just mentioned that in order to get a result, you need to ask the right questions at the beginning, because one may be carried away and all of the the back end anyway, the algorithms behind it will end up telling us what we want to hear because we build it up as we go along, as we enter questions into the tool. Then they give us what we want to hear. But earlier you talked about 13 million in royalties. In what sector exactly? It seems to me it's not that much. For how many artists, or could you clarify that briefly? Yes, thank you. There were 30 million royalties in the last fiscal year from Quebec, which comes from licenses granted by educational institutions. A large part comes from the primary and secondary education, college level and university as well in Quebec. So what about the cultural side? Do you not deal with that? Cultural royalties or? Well, the royalties are exclusively for the creators of written material. In other words, it only covers the text and part of the visual arts where we have artists in visual arts that are where it's reproduced in those works, which who obtain royalties. Mr. Griffiths, if you don't mind, I would like to launch. Is it possible to give him the answer? I don't know if you remember the question exactly. We were talking about competition in the sector of artificial intelligence, in particular with winners and losers. I don't know if you remember the question. I could ask my colleague to repeat it.
Mitchell, can you ask a question?
Sure, I could take a crack at that. Winners and losers and competition. There will be an ongoing problem. We've discussed it this afternoon of the scale and the size of of the capital infrastructure and other investment required to maintain and operate these large language learning models. These are now multi-trillion-dollar companies. AI chips have a roughly 12 to 18-month shelf life before they have to be completely replaced by the next generation of technology, and if indeed chips continue to progress. So my point is that there is massive capital investment that we're seeing and that needs to continue for the foreseeable future for this technology to exist and we'll see possibly improve. That means that I think we have to understand that we're living in a reality whereby the large incumbent tech companies are to a certain degree protected. They have a moat around them as a result of their scale and their size and their ability to create this technology and then distribute it to us at scale. So I think our competition focus is probably best targeted on ourselves and our own industries inside Canada instead of trying to figure out how we're going to limit or encourage competition on the part of these large multi-trillion-dollar multinationals. We all know that there are a series of trade negotiations underway right now. There's a U.S. administration that clearly has a very favorable eye towards technology as one of America's kind of pinnacle technologies that's attached to its geopolitical significance and the extent to which it is now competing with China. So I mention all this not to make our discussion overly complicated or take it off into other directions, but just to try to be realistic about where I think government can and should have an impact in Canada. And I think that's with regards to individual industries and hopefully seeing this technology as an opportunity to bring competition to industries. This is not the Finance Committee, but I would urge the Finance Committee to look at how these technologies could empower fintech and empower greater competition within our financial sector. Similarly, within telecommunications, we are going to have all kinds of changes, new consumer products, new ways of delivering and sharing information that might, again, be able to bring greater competition to that industry also. So I would look at this technology as an opportunity to encourage and foster competition to the benefit of consumers and creators and the industries themselves.
Thank you. Mr. Miles, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this conversation. I'm finding it fascinating. And I just want to say a couple things because it seems to me, and I think we're going to all be discussing these points, but there is a point at which AI is a tool, and then there is a point at which AI becomes the craftsman itself. There's a point at which it becomes the search engine, and then there's a point at which it becomes the journalist. And this is kind of the tension we're talking about. I thought that Monsieur Généreau's question was actually super interesting about whether one can use it and be an artist. I think we want to be a little careful. I really like the question because I think we want to be careful that we aren't, we're clarifying when it is a tool and when it is the craftsman itself. Because I think we also don't want to look, I think about the 1980s when hip hop came around and people said, that's not art. That's not art, they're sampling records. We look at it now, of course it was art. It was transformative, right? Sampling records, those things were big, and it changed the way we made music and listened to music. So I think it's important for us to be thinking about these issues in a way that at points they are tools. We can't just put up our hands and go, no, we need to move things forward. Artists will adapt. They always adapt. That's what they do the best. That's what they did in the 1980s with hip hop. Hip hop changed the whole world. So I guess my question is, how, in the world of regulation, how do we make these fine points between when it is a tool? Maybe it's through transparency, as you're saying. But when it is a tool and when it becomes the craftsman itself, je suis désolé que j'ai parlé en anglais là, mais c'est des questions peut-être.
I'm sorry, I only spoke in English, but maybe this is a question for Marie-Julie. Thank you for the question, but in fact, I am going to give the floor to Maryse Beaulieu. I just maybe will say simply that there is a point where the legislature, passes laws, but there could also afterwards be decision on what can be decided to be used for a tool. We talk about the intention of the creator. And in fact, we want to come back to the evidence. The creator have to prove that they went through a creative process when it comes to generating any content. For us, the position is very clear. We agree that the creator, artists, and even cultural businesses use AI as a tool. So we're not preventing them from using AI. When we're asking transparency when it comes to how they use the AI, we want to talk here about the product that would be purely generated by AI. Well, there are very, very different limits, and many people will certainly look at cases like this and they will see, okay, where was the intention? Where is the limit? But I don't think this would prevent us from moving forward and to be able to identify what was purely created by AI. For you see, in Spotify, there was an inundation of music that was completely created and AI generated. And it allowed Spotify to make some savings, I am completely flabbergasted by this response. It's great. I don't want to use a particular name of a book because I don't want to infringe on copyright, but the question that you're asking is very difficult because there isn't a single response to it. We're going to analyze in case law the issue of talent to determine what is an original art, but when we are in front of what we call extracts, where material is used that was generated by after training of the model, what we decided collectively in the culture industry, we decided that this is not actually art. I'm a bit limited my vocabulary because I'm very specific. We're not talking about art. It's just content, and it is not content that is protected by the copyright law. Regarding the issue of when we are in front of a tool, when we are in front of a work that can be attributed to a creator, we already have tools to determine when an artwork is considered original, and we will have to talk about the factual situation here and there. I don't have a magical way of being able to determine what will be the results, but right now, when we talk about a work, when content is generated solely based on material coming from AI, there's no creation, so there will be no protection. And this is our position. This is what we're submitting here. Because here again, there's an entire new question. When artwork is protected, there's a whole regime that protected, the Copyright Act. And I really like that act. And when we are in front of objects, which are basically, non-identified object content, where we cannot attach an author, we are arriving in a zone that is completely different. And to come back to your question about a tool, as I was saying, it is a matter of degree. Historically, it is very often based on legal decisions that we were able to determine whether it was art or it was an object. So I'm sorry for this very complex response, but that's what I can do. Very complex, but interesting. Mr. Shampoo, you will be the last in this round, and you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much to specify exactly how much time I have. Mr. Anctil, I'm going to talk to you. When radio arrived, it was a complete revolution in technology. But with the years coming back, this sector became actually, profitable for culture, but also for the news. When television arrived, it was the same. We thought the radio was an old thing and it wouldn't survive, but in fact, there was room for everybody. Television, was scary in the beginning, and then it became an extraordinary tool and an indispensable tool for culture. And it's the same thing for internet. Lots of people were afraid of it. Was it the end of television? No, we just reviewed the way it was provided. But now we have artificial intelligence. What do you think? Is this going to be the same? Do you think that at some point for the cultural area, we will be able to live in an area where there will be AI, everywhere in the creation sector, and still make it so that our culture, our cultural artists, and anybody who works there can still live and create and make a living with this? Do you see a scenario in which it would be possible with AI?
Innovation médiatique.
So in the list of innovation that we've seen in telecommunication, all the ones that you mentioned, there's something that is very common. New jobs were created. New ways of communicating and connecting with each other were created. But there is a difference with the internet of today. The internet today is dominated by a handful of players. The example that we heard earlier with the long discussion of Mr. Griffith about Google. I don't see that there can be any possible fair competition with Google, because if I buy a Google phone, for example, I'm in Google world. So whether we talk about search engine or the online software, or whether it's social media, there's only a few players, and they control the evolution of AI in relation to these environments. And that is the issue right there. If you want to protect cultural diversity, if you want to protect discoverability of content coming from this cultural diversity, and if you want true and fair competition worldwide for all our industry, we wouldn't have any choice. We have done this in the past. We must have a proper infrastructure. We decided to have our own TV and radio infrastructure. We had the material control of it. So we don't control internet, but we do not control the basis of this technology, AI, which is the servers. So we don't have any online sovereignty, then I don't have any hope for that, yes. Okay, you're giving us a bit of a recipe here. I want to give a minute to all our witnesses. They came here or they took the time. This is the first study on this topic, and I thought it was absolutely amazing. And I just wanted to take a few seconds to say thank you very much. And you are really helping us take this study very well.
Right out of my mouth, Martin. Truly, thank you to all of the witnesses for spending these 2 hours with us. I think we all found it very fascinating. I'm sure that there are other things that you would have liked to have said that maybe didn't make it on the record. I would invite you all to submit those thoughts and comments to our committee so that we would have them in the consideration as we prepare a study on this report. But thank you again for your time, and I will declare this meeting adjourned.